everyone. So today I have a story for you, and it's not the typical true crime story that you run into these days, and it's not really well documented on the internet either. In fact, it's not really a true crime at all. It's more of a tragedy story. Now, I know this story because it was discovered by my grandfather in the early 60s, and of course it had existed and still been talked about by other people at the time, but it hadn't really surpassed more than a town's worth of people. I couldn't find a lot of information online about this story, and the only reason I actually know it is because my grandfather in the 60s heard somebody else talk about this story when he had asked some questions about it. I figured it would be interesting, and I wanted to share it and drop this story into the pool of knowledge that is the internet. So without further ado, let's get into it. My grandfather was a lot of things. He was an artist, he was a Protestant, he was a Marine, and he at one point was a cult member apparently. And although I never got to meet him myself, he sounded like a pretty cool dude. He was always interesting to talk to, he always had some kind of thing to say, and although his life was short-lived, he, at heart, was a businessman. The number one thing he was a businessman. And throughout his fulfilling life of doing whatever in God's name he ever did, because to be honest, he did a lot of weird stuff. He traveled a lot, and in doing so, he would move around a lot. And so, during the early 60s, my grandfather had moved to a small town known as Sherburne, located in New York State. And in that town, he bought this old farmhouse with about 7 acres of land, and on that lay an old schoolhouse. He and his wife, newly married, went out and, cleaned the schoolhouse up, and while doing so, they found this bell. And it's not really that important to the story, but I'll tell you this, that bell ended up staying with the family even after they moved. But anyways, out in the front of the schoolhouse, there was this big old tree, this big, huge tree, with a plaque on it, and engraved on that plaque read the name Ralph. And my grandfather at the time, fueled by curiosity and not knowing who Ralph was or why he was, with his name on the tree or why they named the tree Ralph, went into town asking about the tree. And somehow, my grandfather found a man, an old-timer who indeed knew why there was an old schoolhouse with a tree that had a plaque on it and why the name was written on the plaque. And that, my friends, is when my grandfather heard the story of the boy named Ralph. The story was that when that schoolhouse was still operational, there was a little 5-year-old boy named Ralph. Ralph's family worked as maple syrup producers. They would collect sap and boil it down in these big vats and let all the water boil off, and with time that process would produce that sweet, sticky maple syrup that we all know and love. One day, Ralph was playing near one of the vats of boiling sap, ready to be made into maple syrup, and somehow he fell in. And sadly, there was no way that Ralph could be saved after being boiled alive in a vat of maple syrup. Sherburne was struck with a little sad tragedy for a while, but I don't know if it was ever a big deal. I don't know. It must have hurt the community. It must have been brutal. Sherburne's a small town, but I don't know how it resonated. I couldn't even find anything online about this. But the story of Ralph doesn't end here. Ralph may have been completely forgotten over time if it weren't for his little classmates. The children that also went to Ralph's school were saddened at the loss of their friend, and so they decided to plant a tree in front of the school as a sort of tribute to him. As time passed and the tree grew taller and taller, bigger and bigger, a plaque was eventually then put on the tree with Ralph's name on it. Someone must have obviously done it later. It probably might not have even been the school who did it. It could have been someone else in the town, but all in all, that's why that tree was there with that plaque with that name. And it's very interesting because even though that school no longer was running at the time in the 60s, and with the land being sold off to some random dude, Ralph's tree still stayed up there, big and beautiful, commemorating a little boy who sadly missed out on life. And it very well could still be there now. But even if it's not, the memory of Ralph will still live on in the minds of many. I couldn't really find a lot of information on this story. It obviously happened way too long ago for it to be documented on the internet. And, this actually was like a late story, like an old story in the 60s when my grandfather was asking questions about it. So, all in all, it probably happened quite a long time ago. Despite this, the story will not die. We will keep it running eternally through the power of the internet. Anyways, that was the story of Ralph. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below, and if you liked this video, like it, and if you want to subscribe, subscribe. But on top of that, do you guys like the new sprite? Is it cute? No arms, haha. Anyways, yeah, that's it, guys. That's all I gotta say. I'm working on a big project right now. It's taking a lot of time. Hopefully when I am done with this project, this mega project that is just eating away at my life, then I can get back to making a few extra videos, you know, keeping some consistency. I know it's a little inconsistent right now. I hope this story kind of fared you well, you enjoyed it, I hope it was good, and I hope it made you think or something. I don't know. Like, there's not much to think about. It's just a sad story, and I thought it was a very important one to tell you. So, that was it. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. It has been lovely.